today's session, we're going to be looking at what we do in how we would treat somebody who has a bleed, or in actual fact, if we have a bleed to ourselves. We have three types of blood vessels going around our body. We have the arteries. The arteries are quite a thick vessel. They take blood away from the heart under considerable amount of pressure. If you were to cut an artery, you would notice it straight away because the blood would spurt out. The second vessel is a vein. If you were to cut a vein, then that blood will come out and it will just ooze out, but it could be quite a considerable amount that comes out. And the third one is a capillary. This is the most common type of bleed that most people experience, because capillaries are right at the edge of our skin. And every time we cut ourselves, we will sever many capillaries, and that blood will just trickle out. Well, the first thing to remember when we're dealing with somebody is to sit them down, make them as comfortable as possible. It's quite possible if somebody doesn't like the sight of blood, they could fall to the floor. So let's prevent that. Let's try and sit them down, make them as comfortable as possible. We need to expose the wound. So we're going to roll the sleeve up, rolls the trowel of the leg up. We're going to expose the area of the wound, remembering where you see the blood might not be the site of the bleed. So we're going to expose the wound itself. We need to examine it. Look at the wound. We're looking at the wound for a few reasons. The first, we're looking at the size of the wound. Is it just a small scratch? Is it a little bit more considerable? Is there something in it? And provided the wound is clean, we can then put some pressure on. So we can use their hand. They can squeeze the area of the bleed. They can do the initial treatment for a bleed. Remembering, the one thing that will stop all bleeds is pressure. Keeping that pressure on. So there we've got the initial treatment, but then we need to take it a little bit further. At the moment, I haven't made physical contact with that person. I'm not protecting myself, so I need to get my gloves on. I can get a pair of gloves from my first aid kit. Put my gloves on, I am then fully protected. So how are we going to look at the various types of wounds? Well, when we look at the wound, if it's just a small scratch, a small cut, and we've got a plaster available, then a plaster is quite sufficient for dealing with most bleeds, and that's what most people will actually use. But let's look at how we can clean it. We can run it under cold water. So we take the hand away, we can put the hand under cold water, rinse the water over the bleed to try and clean it, and once we've got it clean, we can take it away with a dry cloth. We can pat around the wound, making it nice and dry, getting an antiseptic wipe and making sure it's nice and clean around there. And once that is then dry, we can then put our small plaster on. Remembering the correct way to put a plaster on is to take the tabs away from the centre part of the pad, place the pad onto the cut, and then take the tabs away from either side, stretching it over the skin and attaching it to the skin. So that's the way in which you deal with a small cut. But when we start talking about dealing with a slightly bigger wound, or we might not have a plaster available, we need to try and get a bandage, preferably from a first aid kit. And bandages will come wrapped in cellophane. Cellophane keeps it nice and clean. You know when you open it, it will be nice and clean and ready for use. So we open it up, unwrap it as far as the pad. Now there is a correct side and an incorrect side. The correct side is the shiny plastic surface, which is what will go onto the bleed. Turning it round, where the bandage is not. So we want to keep that away from the bleed. Place the pad onto the wound. You can get them to hold the pad, or in fact leave the short end dangling down. They can hold that, whichever, it doesn't matter. Keep the dressing wrapped up, and we're going to wrap it around the arm. We're going to go down one side and pulling it quite tight. Always keep a little bit of tension on it. And then we go to the other side and we can wrap that on as well. And now we're just going to go across the wound, wrap it around the arm and go across again. Wrap it around the wound, and we can then use the short end where we can tie it off reasonably tight. We don't have to tie it off. It's possible you can just tuck the dressing in to hold itself, or if you have any tape, doesn't matter what tape it is, initially we can just wrap the tape around just to hold that in place. And that will be sufficient for most little wounds that we would deal with. You don't have to send the person to hospital. Most accidents happen at home or in the workplace where somebody cuts themselves, do not need to go to hospital. You've looked at it, it looks minor. We don't need to go to hospital. That person can keep that dressing on and they can look after themselves. But in the event the wound did look a little bit more serious, when you looked at the wound, there was something in it, so it's a dirty wound. It won't wash out. They do need to either go to hospital or they need to go to some sort of healthcare professional where they need to be taken out in the correct manner. But for a simple wound, you can quite easily deal with it with just a little bit of cloth. But some people haven't got first aid kits. They haven't got bandages. They haven't got plasters. Well, if that is the case, then you could just get a cloth and you could just wrap it round, keeping it quite tight so the pressure is there, but that cloth won't be clean. So we need to try and change it for a clean cloth as soon as we possibly can. So we all know now how we can deal with a very simple wound. Thank you for watching this film.